In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davies. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. Today, I am so excited to introduce someone who I'm very lucky to call a friend, the incredible Kristy Gray. Kristy's a phenomenal astrologer who has such a beautiful and practical approach to her astrology. Her journey began with a big question: why am I here? And that curiosity led her from a successful career developing people and brands at Clinique and Sephora to discovering the transformative power of natal chart astrology in 2015. So we're in good hands. She's been doing it for a long time. Through astrology, Kristy helps individuals unlock profound self-awareness and align with their purpose. And I had the pleasure of experiencing a one-on-one session with Kristy. And I have to say, and this is not even exaggerating, it was nothing short of life-changing. I really felt like it gave me such a beautiful path to go down off the back of our session. And so I'm so excited today. In this episode, we're going to explore how astrology connects with work and wellness, and how the stars and your natal chart can help guide us in navigating our careers and lives. So welcome, Kristy.
Oh, thank you for such a beautiful introduction. It's always awkward. Like, I always feel really awkward when I hear somebody sing my praises, because I try to remain as humble as possible in the work that I do.
Oh, and that, you know what, that's what I love about you, but you are so incredible at what you do. And that's why I'm really, really looking forward to having you on. You just have such a beautiful approach, and I think a grounded approach too, you know, in an area that can, you know, maybe sometimes have a little bit of a sort of woo, you know, air about it. You just have a really grounded approach. And I love the way I think you say that you use it as like a language, which I love. But I wanted to start just with your beginning into astrology. And I just want to know what drew you to natal chart astrology, and how did this practice resonate with you personally?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I always love premising is that my path was less than linear. I did not wake up when I was 4 years old and go, I want to become an astrologer. That was not my reality. I really spent 10 years in the corporate industry doing something that I actually really love, but also equally knowing that something was missing. And by chance, in my corporate HQ in Sydney, so I was working in the training team for Sephora Australia, and our country manager at the time had gone to see a psychic, and she was rallying up all of us to go and see a psychic. And I'm always up for a little bit of woo, but I went and saw the psychic. Now, I saw the psychic a couple of times, but the first time that I saw her, she had an ephemeris, which is the traditional way of looking at a natal chart. And she said to me, oh, you're really fiery. And the combination of the ephemeris and that comment piqued my interest. Now, I don't remember anything about the reading. And even the last time I saw her, which prompted me to then kind of go down the path of astrology, again, there was nothing that really stood up other than what she said to me was, I don't think you're done studying. And so to kind of backtrack a little bit, I had spent 10 years not only trying to understand myself, trying to figure out what my purpose was, And I studied my certification in fitness. I studied nutrition. I studied life coaching. I even did something completely left field, which was crystal healing, like almost trying in desperation to figure out what my thing was. But the thing that was really interesting, and I think this happens for a lot of people, is astrology was always in the background. Like I was always asking people what their star signs were. In my corporate career, I was facilitating things like disc profiling.
Yeah.
So understanding people is innately something I adore. And it wasn't until I really realized it could be a possibility that I went down the path to become an astrologer. But it took lots of messy stepping stones to get to that place. And even when it was in my peripheral, I still didn't feel like I was ready. So I think that's a really important point I try to make for a lot of people, because I think sometimes we are like living and breathing our purpose, but for whatever reason, we might be afraid, or we might not feel like we're ready, or maybe we have societal expectations or conditioning that's actually influencing our path forward. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you know why I love this so much is because a lot of people will resonate with that, Kristy. I think sometimes we hear these stories of people choosing a path and knowing they were going to do it since that, like you said, 4 years old. And I just don't think that's the case for so many people. You know, if you had have asked me 15 years ago if I'd be doing this now, no way. You have to sort of go through those ups and downs and try different things, and it leads you there. So I love hearing that story. And I think it's also why you are so wonderful at what you do, because you have all these other experiences that you're able to weave in to the way that you read someone's natal chart, which I think is just so incredible. You obviously studied, but what helped you to make the leap and leave corporate and start doing astrology full time? Because that's a really tough challenge.
Oh my goodness, yeah. If I had chosen the easier path, and you and I were only talking about this offline the other day, I would have stayed in corporate. Like, to be honest, like running a company, and especially at the capacity I'm doing now, it's like it takes a lot from you, but I also wouldn't trade it for the world. But I think I had all these signs, so I kept coming to this place of, is this it? That was the question I had asked myself consecutively for 3 years. I moved to Melbourne. I moved from Estee Lauder Companies to Sephora, started with Sephora, then moved from Melbourne to Sydney, went back into education, and I still was deeply unfulfilled. But see, this is the thing, right? On paper, I should have been really happy. Living in Sydney, single person, traveling the world, working with over 150 beauty brands, you know, being able to interact with brand founders and celebrities. And so essentially it should have been the coolest job in the world. And it was. Like, I really speak fondly of my time at Sephora, but I also had adrenal fatigue. I was completely burnt out because I wasn't following my path. It was almost like the burnout. Yes, my workload was big, but I think it was because I was trying to force a square peg in a round hole, which was like trying to grasp at straws. And I'm so lucky because my direct report I'd worked with for over a decade in my previous organization, and then jumping ship to Sephora. And she actually said something to me one day. I think we were driving to a store opening, which was regional. And she just said, you're so accommodating and you're always open to the next thing, but you never claim it. She said something along those lines. And it got me thinking, like, what do I actually want for my life? And the day that she rang me and I was facilitating a training program was the day that I got the promotion that I'd been wanting for the last 12 months. I got the pay rise, and I was like, if I don't say no now, I'm never going to do it.
Yeah.
So it was like one of those really defining moments of, this is a sliding doors moment, and what door do I want to open? And it was such a leap of faith. But it helped me to kind of then figure out what comes next. So I quit my corporate job. I decided to leave Sydney. I moved back home to the Gold Coast, and I was like, I'm going to start this business. Now, this is even before I'd found astrology. Like, I had astrology in the background, But I was doing the life coaching, but I knew something was missing. But I think too, again, we sometimes have to leap before we're ready, even if we don't have every single piece of our puzzle in the way that we believe, because it will unfold in divine timing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love hearing that, because I think a lot of people will resonate with that as well, Kristy. You know, I think there's a lot of people who on paper probably really have a dream job and a dream life, but they're feeling like something's not quite there and not quite right. And what you said about burnout, I actually say this a lot, is that burnout doesn't just come from workload. It comes from working out of alignment with where you feel like your purpose is. Like, that's actually the load it is. Because many of us have the ability to have a really strong workload, you know, but it's that out of alignment with purpose that I think really leads to severe burnout. I'd love to know from your perspective, how can understanding our natal charts support our mental and emotional wellness? Because, you know, if we think about sort of burnout and emotional wellness, how can better understanding our natal chart maybe ensure that either we go down the right path from a career perspective or help us to sort of prevent that burnout?
Yeah, I think for me, astrology isn't about fortune telling. It's an empowerment tool to help us to live in alignment. And that's not just to understand ourselves, but also maybe the season that we're in, or maybe why we've had perpetual challenges over and over again, or maybe to know what's coming up in the next 12 to 18 months. So there's so many layers to astrology, but it can be such a useful tool to understand how we operate, right? How we emotionally respond to things, what our coping mechanisms are. I know for me personally, like under stress, I actually am not good at stopping. So my natural tendency is to continually move, because the movement gives me a faux sense of control. But I know that, and I also know it's not sustainable to be literally on a hamster wheel 24/7. So like my, I suppose, view of continually moving when I know I need to slow down is like cleaning the house or going to the gym, like knowing what to do to lean on for optimal well-being is the key to, I suppose, from my perspective, using astrology as a tool for your higher self. So it can be really great in that regard of knowing who you are, where you're destined to shine, what comes naturally to you, what can be maybe a sticking point. And then that I love cross-pollinating that with health and well-being, because I think that especially where we're at in the world today is that we're all looking for solutions to have it all. And sometimes we can't have it all at once. So just knowing little things that we can do that really are in alignment with our constitution can make our life a whole lot easier and make us feel more confident in who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you certainly did that for me in a number of ways in our reading. And I'm so happy to share this. You said to me, this is just season of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think as someone who is a A-type personality perfectionist, it was really refreshing for me to hear. And I feel like I've just got a whole new lease on the way I approach things now, because I'm not putting so much pressure on myself for everything to be the thing, to do it the best and just give it a crack. And I think even things like that can be really helpful. From a career perspective, I guess in the same vein, if people are feeling stuck or misaligned, like we were saying, or just feeling like something's not quite right, even though on paper it might look like the dream, how can astrology help them to identify sort of their strengths and align more with their purpose?
Yeah. So there's so many different celestial bodies that you can look at, and also the astrological cycle someone's in to see what is actually worth their time and energy. But what I love using astrology for is essentially kind of getting in and getting really granular of, well, what are you doing right now in your career that actually lights you up? Because like, for example, I had a conversation with someone last week who actually really loves her career, but doesn't like the organization she's in. And we actually unpacked like, well, why is that? And it's because she's a person of integrity. She's somebody that needs to live in alignment with her values, and her values don't match the organization. So that's a really easy conversation to have, to go, well, okay, well, now you know that. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that that next role that you embark on, you need to be looking for particular things. And I call them the green flags. whether you're looking for a romantic relationship or you're shopping for a new career. You want to look for those green flags, and it just makes things so much easier, because what I tend to find with people is they actually intuitively already know. It's just so confirming when somebody sits across from them that doesn't know them, and they can mirror and reflect back to them how they're feeling on the inside and essentially what they're thinking. So that can be a great tool for that. The other way that I love using it is I've got an example, or actually a couple of examples in my head where there's certain cycles that we go through astrologically. And I say nothing is good or bad in astrology. However, there's two cycles that I believe are the hardest, and I call that out. But I'm also in the same breath going to say my hard and your hard are two really different things. So we unpack what hard means. But I call it the season where you go through a psychological transformation. It's tough. You're essentially having to kind of finish chapters in your life to make space for new ones. I call it like the phoenix rising from the ashes. And for everyone listening, that sounds really intense, but to kind of break it down, I go, it's the season you get support. Now, for somebody in her career, she was going through some really intense bullying, and it had taken such a toll on her. So what support looked like for her to navigate that period was to get a therapist. And we talked really openly about that. What does that process look like? How often is she seeing that person? So she has some tools to cultivate resilience. Whereas somebody else I'm thinking of who runs quite a large marketing agency and had a few client challenges. When I said that to her, I only saw her a few weeks ago because she came back in quick succession to tell me everything she was changing. She said, I got a house manager and it actually changed my life. So now I can put all of my energy into my career. So this is the dichotomy of astrology. It's not this kind of cookie cutter way of trying to figure out who you are based on your star sign. There's some amazing tools that we can actually lean on. So you can actually have a strategy for managing not only your time, but also your energy and your potential, which in my eyes is like what I'm here to do, because that's how I want to operate in this world. Like, I want to make things as easy as possible.
Absolutely. And, you know, I love that you say energy management, because I speak about this quite a lot on the podcast, is not just time management, but energy management, because they're actually two different things. And quite often we focus so much on time, but not a lot on energy. And I think actually where so much of the power is understanding where your energy should go, and also when you're high energy, when you're low energy, all of that sort of thing. I want to touch on an example that you gave earlier, and not necessarily diving into that person's situation, but you mentioned that they were experiencing bullying. Have you ever, or is there ever an application for better understanding someone's astrology or natal chart in developing better workplace relationships, so you can better understand sort of the team that you're working with, and then, I don't know, maybe understanding what cycles they're in, you know what I mean? So you can sort of maybe understand each other a bit better. Is there an application there?
Yeah. And look, I have actually worked with companies as well in team environments, helping them to understand essentially why they prioritize what they do, which is normally related to our sun sign. Our sun sign is like the CEO of us, and it really is the star of the show and will be a big indicator of how we essentially make decisions and what we prioritize. But also too, our moon sign will show us how we like show up emotionally, like how are we going to deal with stress? So for example, how do we show up for our morning routine, our evening routine, but then also what does that look like on a Friday afternoon when you're under the pump? And you've got all of your team coming to like give you updates and you're still like working around the clock. But then there's other placements as well. Like I love looking at Mercury, which is how we communicate. It's how we synthesize information. That can be such a beautiful way to actually look at, like, I think especially with communication, it's the cornerstone of any relationship, especially in a workplace. And so even knowing that can help us to understand like why maybe a leader communicates the way that they do, because perception is reality. So sometimes somebody might be quite direct and assertive, but it doesn't mean they don't like us. So knowing that, and then sometimes depending on its relevance, I love diving into Venus, which is how you give and receive love. It's going to show you what you require in a relationship to feel fulfilled. So yeah, there's different ways we can look at how an individual operates, but then what does that look like when they're with others? Because we have certain expectations, right, on how we believe people should show up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I love that organizations have brought you in. That's very progressive, I think, of them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's always the cool ones.
Yes, I bet. I can't imagine a bank being proactive about it unless you had quite a progressive leader.
Yeah, totally.
But no, very cool. What about, so you were saying people sort of navigating challenges and things like that earlier. Have you got any other examples of how astrology might be used to overcome professional challenges or navigate big transitions? I'm thinking career transitions or, like you said, you obviously have very strong intuition and you knew that you couldn't accept that promotion. Otherwise, you'd sort of be in there forever. But is there a way that you approach people who come to you with big transitions in life?
Yeah. And look, I think this is what I've loved the most about becoming an astrologer is that there's no two people are the same. No two situations are the same. And it's really allowed me to kind of step back and really try to understand, like when somebody's coming and telling me that they're unhappy in their career, what's making them unhappy? Like, I think it's about getting to the bottom of things because it's sometimes not cut and dry. It's sometimes like because somebody has got things happening at home, or maybe they feel torn because they want to start a family, or maybe it's because they really reached the peak in their organization and they're actually ready for another challenge. And I think that like an example to give you is like we go through this cycle where essentially our status is in the spotlight. We all go through it in a 29-year period. And for all of us, it's at a different time. But I always call it the period of time, which is about a 2.5-year cycle, where we're either reaping what we've sown. So we've essentially, reaping the rewards of all the hard work we've put in, and we can really stand at the top of our summit and feel very content. Or we've scaled that summit and we're unhappy and deeply fulfilled and we're looking for the next one. And it's helping people to understand not only what this means, the time frame attached to it. So because I think too as well, some people think they have to make a decision tomorrow and it's not that easy. And sometimes it doesn't have to happen. Like, for example, I wish I'd known in hindsight, but when I felt really lost at Sephora, I was going through an ending cycle. Ending cycles are literally about endings, and that ending isn't to paint a self-fulfilling prophecy of despair. Some people do have some quite big endings in their life. Other people, it could be the end of an identity. For me, it was an end of an era. And if I'd known that, I wouldn't have felt so lost. So I think that can be really useful for people is to figure out, well, okay, where am I at? Like, and what is this going to look like? And it helps to give us a sense of control and also hope for the timeframes attached to that. Is that what you were essentially asking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing is the sense of hope and also understanding sometimes why you're feeling stuck because of a certain cycle. And I think it can just take the pressure off of feeling like something's not right, but I don't know what it is. Sometimes we know, but we don't know why or what. And I think it can just be really, it just lifts those rocks off your shoulders to just know, okay, this is what's happening. Maybe it's actually not a good time for me to make a decision. Let's just bunker down for a moment or, take some time. Or actually now is a really good time to make a decision and let's go forth and have the courage in that. So I think that's awesome to know. Even when you did my reading, there were things that I think I was studying and you were like, oh God, like well done for getting through that study during that time. And I was like, oh, if only I knew. But, hindsight's 20/20 once you've done it, I suppose. But I'd love to know for people who are new to astrology. So I have always loved astrology. Even as a kid, I would read it in the Sunday newspapers, I'd be obsessed in reading it in the Sunday newspapers. But for people who are new to astrology or, might maybe even be a little bit skeptical, what's one simple way that they could use their natal chart to guide their career and wellness journey?
Yeah, so what you can do is you can actually cast your natal chart online for free. You can use a platform like astro.com. And there's so many amazing apps out there today. The most popular ones are CoStar and the Pattern. If anyone's listening to this and you actually want a copy of your natal chart, you can always reach out to me as well, because I have like a template, which I call my natal chart cheat sheet. So it kind of gives you a little bit of the lay of the land of essentially what makes you you. But start with your sun sign. It honestly, if you can lean into not just where your sun, like the constellation it's in, so your star sign, the zodiac sign, but also the positioning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about houses for a moment, because I think it will be really useful for everyone. And everyone gets really confused with the houses, but I'm going to give you an analogy in a moment. So it should hopefully make it a little bit easier. But just understanding what are all the positive qualities of your sun sign. So like, for example, Ange, like you're an Aquarius. So Aquarians, through my eyes, you are innovative. You're somebody that has to lean into a place of authenticity. There's an active rebellion there too. Now, rebellion is a really interesting conversation because I see astrology as a language, not a belief system, everything's open to interpretation. So I might say rebellion, and people are thinking of, well, I don't protest in the streets or, rally up against somebody's opinion all the time. Rebelliousness can be like actually choosing yourself or like saying, well, you know what? I'm not going to do that because you say I should do it. Like I'm going to learn from experience. So there's real duality in, what makes us us. And I love that, like leaning into that is really important because it's a big part of what makes us ourselves, and also leaning into that authenticity. So I think like exploring your sun sign is such a beautiful place to start, and exploring that. So I'll give another example for you is like you'll read things online that are generalizations, like Aquarians are aloof. Sometimes they can be anxious avoidant, but I reframe that. I go, you're actually really observant. You are observing your surroundings. You're somebody that is remaining curious. Just because you might not be saying anything, your mind's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So it's actually diving into that and unpacking that further rather than kind of putting yourself into a box and going, oh, well, I must be this.
Yeah.
So that can be a great place to start, because really our sun sign is where we're destined to shine. And a lot of our identities are now based on our careers. So if you know not just what the constellation is that your sun sign is in, but the positioning, so where it is in your natal chart. So that comes down to the house placement it's in. Every house, just think of the houses, there's 12 in astrology, and it's what makes up your natal chart. And it's like when you go to Italy or you go to the US or you go to Japan, you get different culture, different experience. That's what the houses are. The houses are essentially more nuanced. They're like the kind of the map of your terrain, and they bring your sun sign to life. So that can be a really nice place to start for some people. And like, for example, my sun is in Virgo in the first house. So here's why my whole business and practice and who I am is based on self-exploration, because the first house, is the house of self. And being a Virgo, I'm interested in optimization, well-being, like how do I, continually put expectations of myself to be better than I was yesterday. Yeah. So when you know that, you know where you're meant to essentially thrive. Some other really cool places you can look, though, is like, say, for instance, the 10th house in astrology. So we have a midhaven, which is up the very top of our natal chart. And that represents the legacy, the direction we're here to embark on. And the 10th house is public image and career. So whatever constellation is ruling that house, it can give us insight as to, what potential industry we could work in and what would give us a sense of fulfillment. But, to give more nuance to it, this is why it's not black and white, is like some people are really driven by money. So maybe their money house is something to look at to see how they can make the most money. Yeah. Because, again, we're all driven so differently depending on who we are and also how we were raised. So I'd love to say it's like there's this one placement to look for, but it's more nuanced than that. But the cool thing is that by unpacking it, you actually get to figure out, for example, where you can live in an alignment from a career perspective.
I love that. It's so cool because I think so many people, their experience of astrology is just, I guess, reading their sun sign in the newspaper, right? Like that's sort of their experience. And so really diving deeper to understanding that has been amazing for me. And I go back to the chart and the download that you gave me all the time. You know, if I'm sort of a bit confused or I'm like, oh, what's going on here? I'm trying to make a decision. I go back to it just to remind myself. And I think it's been a really, really helpful tool. So I think that's awesome to hear. And I actually have both those apps, the Pattern and Coaster.
Perfect.
And they're free. So if anyone wants to download them, they're free. How can we use astrological cycles? So you were talking a little bit about cycles earlier. How can we use them like Saturn returns, like even I know one that a lot of people might be familiar with is Mercury retrogrades, for example, that get a bit of a bad rap. We're in one at the moment, I think, aren't we?
We've just finished one.
We've just finished. Okay, thank God. To better plan for both challenges and opportunities, either in work or at life.
Yeah. So like the youngest person I've seen is 11 and the oldest person I've seen is 78. So these cycles, we all go through them. And you know what? I think this is what I love the most about astrology is we're all very human. Like it doesn't matter if you're really young and you're sitting with me or you're somebody that has lots of like lived experience. We're all seeking purpose and trying to figure out where our place is in the world. And understanding these cycles can be really affirming. So like, for example, if you're somebody that's sitting in front of me that's really young or you're a young person listening today, I always say like, go out and live your life until you're 27. Like, don't just do silly things because you want to do them. Like actually go follow your heart. So if you want to become a poet, go and learn how to write. Or maybe you want to go and have some life experience, go live in London. You follow your heart because what happens is around 27 to 30, obviously depending on where Saturn was when you were born, you go through what's known as a Saturn return. And we go through 2 of these in our lifetime. If we're lucky, we may go through a 3rd, depending on how long we live. And Saturn return means Saturn comes back to its starting position of where it was when you were born. And it is very much a time where we go through a lot of upheaval because Saturn wants us to live in alignment with our potential. So anything we're ignoring comes to the surface. Now, that's why normally around 28, people start to figure out what career am I embarking on? Do I want to get married? Am I going to have kids? It's a very formative age. Now, one thing can happen with that is if you try to tick all those boxes and that's not necessarily who you are, then you sit with me at 35 and go, I did all these things, Kristy, and I'm unhappy. So again, it's like a check-in moment. Now, we have that again around the age of 56. So different conversation because different life experience. We're different people. But a lot of that can still mean like, oh, I've been neglecting my health or maybe my kids have now grown and I'm trying to figure out like what my career will look like and my relationship. So we can use these cycles to actually figure out, again, how do we channel the right energy into the right area of our life? Now, that's kind of one spectrum, which is Saturn's a very personal journey we go on, whereas I think Mercury retrograde is very collective. So from a workplace situation, Mercury retrogrades 3 to 4 times a year. And even scientists believe that it is like something that doesn't affect us. I would challenge that because Mercury rules all forms of communication. And in Greek mythology, Mercury is messenger of the gods. He has shoes that can help him fly between worlds. He's a trickster. So if we think of that planet in astrology, things are in upheaval because Mercury rules all forms of communication. So think technology, emails, text messages. Mercury can make us really nostalgic as well and pine for the past. So examples of this is you might be doing your thing in your career and you get a text from your ex and it's so out of the blue and it just kind of like affects how you're showing up to work. Or you can press like go on that email and not double check it because you're maybe activating your sympathetic nervous system and you're in fight or flight, and then all of a sudden you've sent copy and all and it should have gone to one person, right?
Yeah.
Mercury retrograde is something not to be feared though, right? We have communication mishaps, but it is an opportunity for mastery in our communication. So for example, I always say to people, work behind the scenes, right? So if you are in a corporate setting, say you work in a bank, it would be like use that period of time, that 2-week period, to work on that project that needs to be delivered to the HR department, or work on that thing with your team that needs to get done, because that's essentially what you use those periods of time for. So nothing's bad in astrology. It's just how you choose to work and respond to it.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love removing the stigma around Mercury retrograde and just thinking about how we can better use it for ourselves, right? Like, so if it is that, like you said, go and work on the project quietly rather than worrying that, I don't know, all your technology is going to fail or, whatever it is. So it's funny because I remember, so I launched the podcast based on our session, and it was during a Mercury retrograde. I was like, oh no, is it something going to go wrong? And it didn't. Everything was totally fine. So yeah, I think it's just about removing that stigma, which is cool. And like you said, using things like a Saturn return to help guide us through, our life and the way that we sort of make decisions. And I want to know what your most rewarding part of helping others through astrology is, and you've been doing it for quite some time now. What's the most rewarding part, and how has it positively impacted your personal growth?
I'm going to start with my personal growth first and then talk about how rewarding it is. I'm going to try and not get emotional, because I always do when I talk about it. So I think, and this is because of who I am as a person and my upbringing, is everything was always black and white to me. I always saw things through a certain lens, and not anything is black or white. Everything is nuanced. And I feel like what is the greatest gift astrology has given me is the release of judgment and assumption, and also radical self-acceptance and acceptance of others, because you just never know. Like, so for example, I work online with people, but I also work at a lifestyle retreat here on the Gold Coast, which is called Glengana. And so I don't even know who is about to walk into my practitioner's room. And I don't know if they're a celebrity. I don't know if they're an everyday person. I have no idea. And a lot of the time they don't give me context, whereas a little bit different online. I normally find people will message me first and they want to build a relationship with me. But it's given me this gift of acceptance and a lack of judgment, because, as I said before, we're also very human, but we forget that. And we're also connected. Like, we actually have the same problems and the same worries, but we don't know that, because I think a lot of the time we feel like an island and we're the only ones going through it. And it's really interesting for me, because I'll have, like, maybe I get quite big themes in my business, whether I have the same star sign book on the same day or the same astrological cycle. And I think that can be really humbling as well, because, again, we think we're the only ones going through something. So that's probably the greatest gift astrology's given me. But what I love so much about what I do is not just because I found my purpose in this lifetime, like I will be doing this until the day I die in some capacity. And, I feel really grateful that astrology found me in this lifetime. But to be able to help somebody that maybe hasn't been able to get the insight that they need from their therapist, from their partner, from their best friend. And sometimes I'm a last resort. And a lot of the time people just come in and they go, I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what to expect. I just know that I need to be here. And to be able to give them scope and understanding and see how their shoulders they move from that slouching, defeated, body language to somebody that feels really empowered. And it's not because I have predicted their future or told them that this thing's going to happen on this day. It's because I've allowed them to be human in our interaction and created a safe space for them to unpack sometimes their biggest secrets that nobody else knows about. And I feel very grateful that people can trust me to do that.
Yeah, and I think you do create such a safe space, Kristy. And I think what it also does is it gives people an understanding and a permission to be themselves too. Because I think I said to you multiple times in the session, oh, that's why I do that. Oh, this makes so much sense. That's why that happens. And I think it just releases the pressure. And exactly as you said, it gives you permission to relieve yourself from judgment of yourself as well, you know, just to be like, okay, like this is okay. I don't need to judge myself for this.
Yeah.
It just is how it is. And how do I now optimize through knowing what I know?
Yeah, exactly. Like I say to people, I'm a hope dealer. I'm somebody that is the eternal optimist. That's why the work I do is astrology for your higher self. But I'm also a realist. Sometimes life sucks. But I'm not going to sit with you for 2 hours and sit in the trenches of doom and gloom unless you really want to do that. Because at the end of the day, it's like, how do we find the most empowered path forward for you so that you have agency in this?
Absolutely.
We have free will.
And I love that so much because there is agency. And I think that's what I loved so much about your reading that I did with you, is that really you are actually a hope dealer. Like that should be your trademark, Kristy, because you really do. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And, you know, if someone is sort of unsure in their career or their life, or even, you know, I'm happy to share, you know, Liam and I have decided we're not having kids because we went through a fertility journey. And even having that portion in my chart and talking through that with you, I was like, oh my gosh, even though we'd already made the decision, it was just like, oh, okay, I'm seeing where this is now. And it just is like another layer to being like, okay, remove judgment, move on. And then, you know, you can just accept things for what they are. I'd love to know, looking ahead for you, what is next for you, Kristy? Anything exciting from a project, goals, celestial events, anything that you're excited that's coming up?
Well, I've got some once in a lifetime transits. So I've definitely been hammered the last 2 years with some huge upgrades for myself. So I always find it kind of humorous that I help so many people through their own life transitions while I'm also going through my own. But I think I've been talking about this for a couple of years now, and I also have had a really great start on it. But I've been wanting to write a book for 2 years now. This is the year 2025.
Yes.
But I'm committing to this vision, and I've already booked a 2-day novelist boot camp because I have about 30,000 words, but I've been so back and forth on what this book actually is. And I feel really excited to not just keep talking about it, to actually produce it this year. So that's the goal for this year, Ange.
I love it. I will absolutely be your first customer. I can't wait. Where can we find you, Kristy? If someone has listened to this and it sparked interest and they're feeling like they want to know a little bit more or they want to book in with you, where can we find you on Instagram, web, all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I keep things super easy. It's Kristy Gray. So easy. So you can find me on any social, or actually I only hang out on Instagram, to be completely transparent. I don't even have a LinkedIn account anymore because I used to get spammed all the time. Yeah, you can find me there, or you can, if anything I've shared with you today has piqued your interest and you're curious, or maybe you want a copy of your natal chart, you can always send me an email at hello@kristygray.com, as I will always respond to you with any questions or queries that you may have.
Oh, so good. And that's Kristy with a K, Gray with an A. You'll see it in the show notes so that people can find you. Thank you so much. I have loved our chat, and I just think you're wonderful, and, you know, you just have such a beautiful gift to offer the world. So if anyone out there is listening and it sparked interest, I highly, highly recommend a session with Kristy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And right back at you, sunshine. I absolutely echo how I feel about you. So,
oh. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram @MindYourGrit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.